We're moving on to the next Silver Jubilee lecture. This lecture will be delivered by Dipak Gyawali, Chairman, National Water Conservation Foundation and former Minister of Government of Nepal. Can I please request you to come on stage? And this lecture will be chaired by Ambassador Dilip Sinha. The topic for this lecture is Transcending Constraints of Geography, Role of Inland Navigation in the Shared Future of Himalaya-Ganga. We have about 30 minutes for the lecture, and that can be followed by Q&A. Can I please request the chair to take over the proceedings?
Thank you. So welcome after a sumptuous lunch. We will move straight away to our speaker because we're already 5 minutes late. I don't think the speaker requires any introduction. Those of you who participated in the discussion that took place on Nepal yesterday, a very animated discussion. He was there in that discussion. Of course, he refused to lose his thunder. He decided to preserve it for today. So we all look forward to listening to him. Mr. Dipak Gyawali is an academician, an economist, an engineer, and a political leader as well. One of his links with Bihar, there are many I'm sure, is that when he was Minister of Water, he was the first Minister of Water from Nepal to pay an official visit to Bihar way back in 2003. And so obviously his links to the state go back to the times when he was dealing with the problem himself. So without much ado, I'll request Mr. Gyawali to present his paper.
Thank you, Chair. Some history. To me, this is a bit like this ADRI conference. It's one of the best conferences I have attended in recent times. Very rich. But there is a bit of a deja vu. You can hear me? Yeah. 25 years ago, in Patna, was held a big meeting, a similar big meeting, Nepal had just had its multi-party democracy restored, and all kinds of big people were here. Muchkund Dubey, the foreign secretary, M.A. Chitale, the water secretary, and so on and so forth. Some of us have landed up here from Nepal. And one of the things we mentioned was that there is a need in the new rethinking of collaboration between Nepal and India. We need to think of navigation especially in the Kosi. Okay? And the moment we said it, the entire Indian hydrocracy, I call it the hydrocracy, jumped up in anger and said it is not possible. Farakka has already been built and you cannot have navigation. Well, Nepalis were asking that we have navigation and access to the sea. And this was strange because about 5 years earlier, in 1986, the Ganga had already been declared a national waterway all the way from Haldia to Allahabad. And I don't know if there's anybody here from what is called the National Inland Navigation Institute here in Patna. I would have loved to interact with them. Apparently there is an institution like that, set in 2004. Okay. Now, funny thing happened in that meeting. The moment the Indian hydrocracy jumped up and said navigation is not possible, the entire Bihari academia NGO crowd got up, and the bureaucracy too, members of the bureaucracy, and said in one voice, why is Delhi objecting to Kathmandu's request for including navigation in the development of water resources? Yes, Nepal is landlocked, but Bihar is as landlocked as Nepal. Now, the reason I mention this is that, actual numbers are hard to come by, but it's a political number that's well accepted in Nepal, that we pay in demurrage charges every year at Calcutta port more than we receive in Indian aid altogether. Now this was told to us also, but when Shillong, I'll talk about that meeting a bit later, in Shillong last year, that the Indian Northeast feels similarly strangled by Calcutta port and its Marxist-controlled trade unions, where the theft and all kinds of delays are unbelievably high. Now, the thesis I am proposing before you, a challenging thesis, is that the backwardness of Bihar, Jharkhand, Nepal and the Indian Northeast is precisely because we have not developed navigation and we are tied to the mess at Calcutta port. You can go to the Indian Northeast and they'll tell you this even in more vociferous terms than I can. Now, fast forward 6 years later, in 1997, the Nepal-India talk on the Kosi moved 1 inch forward when, under the grand old man of Nepal's water resources, Dr. Anandbabu Thapa, he was the team leader and the secretary of the member secretary of the Water and Energy Commission. He led the Nepali team. Very reluctantly, the Nepal-India talks, there was an agreement to include the study of navigation in the Kosi project, 1997. Yesterday, my colleague Dr. Dwarikanath Dungal, the former Secretary of Water Resources of Nepal, mentioned in that Nepal-Bihar session yesterday that 20 years have gone by and nothing has moved. The study has not even gone forward, very similar to the Mahakali Pancheswar Treaty, where it's already 20 years and nothing has moved, not even the DPR, which according to the treaty should have been made in 6 months. It's 20 years. Now, why is this? I argue that there is a very contradictory ethos between the hydrocracies of this region. The Delhi UP hydrocracy, its objective is what is called supplemental inundation irrigation in UP and perhaps some water supply for Delhi. In Bihar, the ethos is flood control. Bihar really doesn't need irrigation simply because it's floating on groundwater, at least North Bihar. West Bengal, the whole concern is how to flush Calcutta port, not realizing, as my good friend Jayanta Bandyopadhyay has written with his student Vidisha Malik, a wonderful paper, which shows that dredging and other means would be more effective at Calcutta port. Flushing from the water of Farakka is just not possible because the tidal bore that comes back from the Bay of Bengal is 700 times more than any amount of flushing you can do from Farakka, which makes it meaningless. And in Nepal and also Bhutan and Sikkim and Uttarakhand, Arunachal and other places, the whole ethos is hydropower. Now, this failure to address the multipurposeness of storage reservoirs. A storage reservoir, the moment you build a dam to store water, produces many things. It produces some electricity, obviously. It produces flood control. It produces dry season irrigation water, which is very, very, very valuable. Because Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and especially Uttar Pradesh, is land rich and water scarce. And it also produces water for navigation, for fisheries, for tourism, you name it. The failure to address these jointly and to plan for projects where these things are taken into account and the beneficiaries, the multiple beneficiaries of these types of benefits pay for the cost of the dam and the running of it, means that none of these projects are moving forward. I was very surprised when my good friend, the late Ramaswamy Iyer, the eminent water scholar of India and former secretary, when I mentioned this to him, and I said, no amount of cooperation between Nepal and India will succeed until we first in Nepal learn to build a small multi-purpose project, hydropower, irrigation, flood control, navigation, fisheries, whatever, in Nepal, for Nepal, small one. Then we will know what is involved and then we can collaborate with India on a good term. Ramaswamy surprised me by saying, Dipak, there is no multi-purpose project in India. I said, come on, wait a minute, what about this Bhakhras and all these big things we hear? He said, no, they were designed as single-purpose projects, and the multi-purposeness was later added as an add-on and has never really functioned properly. Now, Bihar's dilemma here is this, very simple. And if Bihar is slated to be in this planning a loser simply because of the wrong optimization criteria. You see, to build a reservoir for flood control, the optimization principle in engineering is you have to keep a reservoir as empty as possible, as much as possible. Because you don't know when the next big flood will come, so that it needs to be cushioned, okay? Now, the optimization criteria for hydropower, irrigation and everything else is you need to keep a reservoir as full as possible with as much stored water as possible. And hydropower, irrigation and everything else pay. They generate money. Flood control does not generate any money unless you've got a good insurance scheme, which is not there in our part of the world. Hungary, Slovakia are working on it. Okay. So, what Bihar really needs, is actually what I'm going to come to in navigation. Because it's a landlocked inland region where the cost of goods are very high simply because of the Calcutta port and the fact that land transport is extremely expensive. Now, let me go to some pretty amazing numbers. These are, average broad numbers I have culled from many, many different types of readings. You see, look at the physics of water transport. 1 horsepower engine can move 50 kilograms by truck on a road, 500 kilograms by railway, which is a much more efficient transport system. Think of it, a couple of truck engines, pulls how many carriage and bogies, and 4,000 kilograms for inland water transport. This is the physics of it, okay? Now, in terms of energy, in megajoules per 1,000 ton kilometer, now these numbers start getting complicated, okay? I mean, I've distilled the gist, that's all we've done. A truck, you can see, consumes 920. Rail consumes 430, half of that. And inland shipping consumes half of that. If you take these numbers for German numbers that I have for cost terms, a road transport takes 16 euro cents. Rail transport per ton kilometer. Rail transport is a third of that at 5 euro cents. And inland water transport is half of that at 2 euro cents. So the case for water transport is straightforward, open and shut. It's not happening. According to two US economists that I've read who were doing a study on the container, they showed that for a Barbie doll, where the eye, that fancy blue eyes are manufactured in Japan, the hair is done in Taiwan, the clothes are manufactured in Hong Kong and so forth, and all assembled in some Chinese plant. A multinational company has different factories all around the world. These two economists write that for the purpose of planning these kind of multinational enterprises, the cost of transport, because of the container transport and the sea transport, the cost of transport can be considered zero for planning purposes. It's so cheap, you don't bother about it. But if you go for road transport, you're in deep trouble. Now look at what has happened in different parts of the world. Look at Europe. This is a bad map, I agree. But what it will tell you is if you go from the left, you see the Rhine navigable all the way from Rotterdam to Switzerland. You see the Danube navigable from the Black Sea all the way to Hungary and Czechoslovakia, Czech and Slovak republics. You look at the Danube and you go all the way from the Black Sea, deep into Belarusia. And you look, the most amazing, you look at the Volga-Don canal system, and from the Black Sea, you go on the Volga-Don canal, come to the Volga, and from the Caspian Sea, you can go all the way to the Baltic Sea. Means these massive continental-sized places have got inland transport, which is not good to transport, fabric and these fancy fashion things, they're too expensive, they can be packed on a plane and gone. But for construction goods, for grain, for all these kind of things, there is no substitute. Look at North America. Navigable all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. Interestingly, the US Army Corps of Engineers, which is the biggest dam builder in the world right now, was founded not as an army unit to do construction for the army. It does that, but it was actually founded to facilitate, that's what its founding principles say, to facilitate interstate commerce by widening rivers and allowing ships to move on them, on the Mississippi and all these other rivers in the US. What have others done? Look at container traffic. My figures are about 5-6 years old, but they haven't changed much. Singapore is the biggest container port in the world. 9% of all world's containers move through Singapore, almost 1 in every 10. China accounts for 33% in 5 major ports of China. USA, West Europe, and I should have added also Japan, account for 29%. 4 less than China. Thailand is 2%, and India is about 1%. And mostly at that Navsheva or something in Bombay. Now the portion of overall transport by inland waterways, now these are complicated numbers and depends on how you calculate, but I've tried to summarize. Netherlands, because it's just a delta, it's about 35% in Netherlands, even for small things moving to shopping malls and all that. USA is 8%, China is 9%, and India is only half a percent. Now, also, look at China. What had happened in China is till 1984, China had very little inland water transport. In 1984, they decided, as only the Chinese can, that there was too much congestion on their roads and they had to develop inland transport. And between 1984 and 2005, the Chinese developed their inland water transport so fast, they are now at the same level as US on their what is called commercially significant. US and EU have, in kilometer terms, more water transport, but in commercially significant terms, China has as much water transport as US and EU combined. India does only 4% of its overall trade through water transport, China 47%. Now, given the numbers I showed you before of the physics of it, of how it's several thousand times cheaper to do it by through water than through trucks, you know what that means in terms of global competitiveness. Now, this is, because we're talking Bihar, Jharkhand, also Jharkhand I won't talk much about it. India has done something amazing a couple of years back. It has passed the National Waterways Act for 111 waterways in India. And while this started earlier, this is a nice, amazing thing, and this is what I am talking about, that this might change the entire water development discourse in South Asia if pushed properly. There's still a lot of things to be done, and there are a lot of problems ahead, I'm not denying that, but it will change the discourse. Look at it. I mean, much of Jharkhand could be very easily accessible right up to the Rangali Dam or whatever it's called, and maybe tied to Hirakud Reservoir on the other side, through water transport. That would bring down the cost of goods amazingly in South Jharkhand, but I'm going to mostly talk about the National Waterway 1, okay? And between Nepal and between Haldia all the way to Allahabad. As you can see, this is going to be a major artery if developed properly. It will serve over 500 million people, 500, 600 million people. It's going to be a major waterway, but there are severe challenges. Main problem is going to be that the draft, the depth of the water required, especially in the dry season, has to be at least 2 to 2.5 meters. Now that will be available mostly only between Haldia to Faraka to Ghazipur. Whereas from Ghazipur to Allahabad, it's only 1.5 meters at best. What this means is that you need storage. You need storage dams. Now, augmenting the dry season flow. Now, where can storage dams be built on the Ganga? Yeah, some in Uttarakhand maybe, and there is Tehri and all that, okay? But don't forget that 45% of the average flow of the Ganges overall comes from rivers from Nepal, and 70% of the dry season flow of the Ganges comes from rivers from Nepal. And it's in Nepal for the Ganges that most of these sites are located, the storage sites, 30 reservoir sites there. It's not going to be easy to build, and it's going to have huge amount of problems that dams have, but properly addressed, they could be addressed is my point. Okay. Now, what is forgotten here is that there is already a huge market for riverine transport, on National Waterway 1. And I might as well state my other thesis here, that my first objection is, why not have a heart large enough to call it a South Asia International Waterway instead of India Waterway? We in Nepal and Bangladesh and Bhutan really get surprised when you watch Doordarshan. And then the weather comes and they have the satellite map of the Indian monsoon. And somehow the Indian monsoon seems to stop at the borders of Bangladesh and Nepal, and it's all blank white. Somehow the Indian monsoon doesn't seem to cross the border. They don't have the visa or whatever. I mean, come on, let's grow up. This is South Asia, it's one region, and we should think of developing a South Asia International Waterway. Because you will not have that waterway unless you have storage reservoirs in Nepal. There are already 10 thermal plants and 11 are expected to be built along this waterway. They require even now 70 million tons of coal, and 14 million tons of coal have to be imported. Now, transporting them by trucks is going to make power price go through the roof. Transporting them through water means the transport cost is next to zero. 7 fertilizer plants, as you can see, 300,000 tons of per month of food transported from Kolkata to Agartala alone. Nobody's bothered to calculate what's going to be transported within. Cement, steel, heavy equipment for construction, transport, etc. You add this and you find out there is a significant economic gains to be made just by developing a riverine transport. Now, there was an amazing conference in Shillong last year, and I was there. It was interesting because Bangladesh had sent a 148-member delegation led by 2 ministers. The redoubtable Dago Shering of Bhutan was there, the former Home Minister. All the chief ministers of the Northeast were there. Suresh Prabhu was to come and he somehow didn't come in the last minute. But there were only 2 Nepalis, both of whom are participating here today, me and the editor of Spotlight. And this conference was amazing because it was about Beyond Borders, the Nadi conference, and many institutions all the institutions of the Northeast, plus Maulana Abdul Kalam Institute of Calcutta. They were all involved. But what dominated the discussions was navigation. And the Northeast people were very clear that they want this navigation through Bangladesh all the way to Silchar, as well as beyond, that last point, Dibrugarh, much beyond Dibrugarh, where navigation can be developed. If that happens, the Indian Northeast will no longer have to feel as if it's strangled by Calcutta Port. So this dominated the entire discussion, and it was another one good meeting that I had attended. Okay. Now, I'm going to close by basically talking about some philosophy of why this is not happening. Exactly 20 years ago, Meghnad Desai, when we were doing the Human Choice for Climate Change, accused me of being a card-carrying member of the cultural theory gang, your exact words, and I happily admit to that. So I'll use some cultural theory to try to explain the politics of technology that militates against it. This is just to challenge you to, insights. Look at these 3 pictures. This is all in Nepal, in a place of southern, on the Tinau River. The brushwood technology is a community-led thing. It's a very disposable dam, traditional technology. Even 80% of Nepal's irrigation is still done that way. The trouble is, engineers don't like it. This is not taught in any IIT or any engineering college I know anywhere in the world. Okay. So on that river, in 1961, there was a community doing things have a hard time because it's hard to get voluntary labor. They approached the government engineering departments, and with Indian aid in 1961, this concrete dam was built, agency-built technology. Okay? What happened? In 1962, the river moved away. And the dam is standing there, monument to man's stupidity. You know, there it is. That's the comedy part. The tragedy part is that the area that it was to serve, because the area below had been destroyed by grid engineering, all the traditional irrigation system destroyed. So because the farmers' irrigation system was completely destroyed, their livelihood was gone, that turned into a dacoit infested area. And it was revived not just by police action, but by this other market technology of Kirloskar pumps. Okay. So you can see that this technology choice is a very, very social political decision that happens. Okay. This navigation is not going to be any different. It will need very strong governments to come and do it. Okay. But it will also need to bring in together the market forces, and it will also have to bring in the cautionary civil society voice. The filtering out of technology is done generally by agencies. In Nepal, for instance, we find out that much of the springs where water is, villages dependent on water, and we have studied this in Garhwal and in Sikkim and Darjeeling, it's by these small ponds, but nobody wants to talk about ponds. Everybody wants to build cement dams. Okay? And these three types of social solidarities, as we call them, you know, you need the cautionary voice. Public-private partnership is not enough, PPP. We need PPCP, public-private civic partnership, where the critical voice of the egalitarians, the D.K. Mishras of the world, is very necessary. They may not be pleasant to hear at times, but they are a cautionary voice, the proverbial canary in a mine, you know, that gives early warning of the disaster that might come. They may not always be right, 100%, but even if they are 20% right, it's worth considering. So the navigation issue has to bring in all these players. Now, I'm supporting navigation as an environmentalist for basically three reasons. My first reason is, of course, what you've already seen, the overall energy efficiency, especially for an energy scarce region like South Asia. We are not the Middle East. You know, we don't have that kind of this thing. Our coal in India is the worst kind of coal, anthracene. You know, it has too much sulfur in it. Okay, so we need to go for any, you know, fuel-saving device, and riverine transport is the best means to do that for bulk transport of goods with massive economic savings. I'm supporting it as an environmentalist because the current ethos and practice, as I showed you before, is bad irrigation, where the de facto policy is not a drop wasted to the sea, you know, and essentially sucking a river dry and filling it back with pumped sewer. That's what we have. That's why Ganga is not clean and will not be clean unless we have a different ethos coming to the fore. Okay. Sundarbans we hang, we don't let a drop be wasted to the sea. Okay. Okay, and so what we are seeing is that if we bring in navigation, it brings in an alliance of consumer rights folks who want to see cheaper products for consumers and not be shafted by trucking cartels and trade unions in the Calcutta port. It also brings in environmentalists who want to see a clean river, the riverine transport people who want to make sure their bargemen don't choke in methane and carbon dioxide and the boats don't corrode the very next day. So you have an interesting building up of an alliance coming up. Now, but that is necessary. Without it, it won't move. And finally, the third reason is geopolitical. Storage, as I said, is only possible in Nepal, Himalaya, for the Ganges. And we have calculated, my colleague has just gone out, I think Govinda Sharma posted, but he could tell you off the top of his head, a small dam, not even very big like the Kosi or the Pajeshwar or whatever, or the Karnali, even a 1,000 megawatt storage project on West Seti on the Karnali, the stored water there raises the draft of the Karnali, the Ghagra river in India, at least the Karnali portion in Nepal, by several meters in the dry season. Just a small dam does that. That is provided you don't suck everything for irrigation after that. Okay, or bad irrigation. Okay. Now, for Nepalis, the big problem is the psychological problem of landlockedness. And Nepalis won't like, and I've said this in Bangladesh, once I said, you know, oh, so what are you paying us for exporting your flood to Nepal? They said, no, we're not exporting flood to Nepal. So what do you think building a dam in Nepal is like? You're exporting your seasonal flood to Nepal as a permanent flood. Of course, we can do that, but we need to be paid for it. Okay, so what are you willing to pay? Anyway, this surprises many people also here in Patna and Lucknow when I say that. But yeah, there is a price for that, and one has to be very sensitive about what happens to people. They should not be worse off. They should be better off than they were. And that has not really been worked out. We've done a very, very bad job, as anyone will tell you, in India and in Nepal. In our session yesterday, we talked about how for 50 years with this current Kosi project, people still have not been compensated. If you can't compensate people in half a century, what faith that you will do so tomorrow is the big question. But we have to handle that question. So the problem is that for the hills, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal, Nepal, Bhutan, the idea that you can have access to the sea becomes a very, very interesting selling point. And if somebody can do the calculation to show that, well, this is the savings we have overall from transport efficiency, and part of that will go to actually make your lives better in this manner. Now, I admit that's a tall order. It may take years to negotiate that kind of thing. Then you might be able to convince all the Nepalis and the Uttarakhandis and the Arunachalis as well. What I will close is with this diagram, which basically shows that the three social solidarities, the government, market, and civil society, normally should be like this. With government as Edmund Burke's trustees, civil society as his small platoons, and market as genuine private goods. But we have a distortion here of dharma gone wrong, as we say. Each one of these entities is not fulfilling its dharma. Governments are doing business with license Raj. Civil society is also not doing activism, but is actually, running massive businesses with bongos, dongos, gongos, and pongos. These are government-organized NGOs, business-organized NGOs, and the worst in Nepal, political party-organized NGOs. It's a disaster right now in Nepal. And capitalism, really, market not being the hidden hand, but crony capitalism with club goods disguised as private goods. Now, if this is restored, some kind of an alliance building is done between environmentalists and consumer rights people who want to see cheaper goods, then maybe a green socialist movement is just waiting to be born with navigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dipak Gyawali. I was just wondering how to convey the notice that his 35 minute, of course, but he finished in 30 minutes. So as 30 minutes was getting over, I was wondering whether to get up and tell him or to knock at him, throw something at him. But it seems he got the message. But what's more important is that he finished 5 minutes before his allotted time, which means that he's proved that when you make some really important point with solid content, you don't need to speak endlessly. He's certainly given a very thought-provoking talk, and I'm sure there'll be many questions, so I'll throw it open immediately to the floor. Comments should be as brief as possible, or there'll be comments also, but try and put your question also after maybe a sentence or two of comment. Okay, I see one right at the back over there. That's the first hand to have got up, right at the back.
Sir, thanks for a very thought-provoking and wonderful presentation. Just a very small point. I read just some time back that the world's top 15 ships, top 15 biggest container ships of the world emit more carbon than all the world's vehicles combined, all the road vehicles. Since you are an environmentalist also, I'm sure you would also have worked this into your calculation when you propose more navigation through the rivers. Thank you.
There's a lady over there on the... Yeah, okay.
That was a fantastic presentation, Gyawali. Thank you, Dipak. Sorry. I'm speaking probably impudently on behalf of our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade that are very committed to having more harmonious management of South Asia's river basins. So the question is, how can we help?
Chitria, in the best code over there.
Thank you, sir, for extremely nice delivery of speech. I want to know what is your reaction on Nitish Kumar's appeal for dismantling Farakka barrage, because in Bihar it has been perceived that Farakka barrage is creating a lot of silt. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pass the floor to Mr. Gyawali now.
Okay, I'll take these three first. I'm surprised at that figure, that 15 biggest ships emit more this thing. The numbers I showed you show that that's physically not possible. I just want to know how they calculated that, on what basis, because these big container ships require very, very little energy to be propelled along the sea. You know, compared to an airline, compared to road and rail, the energy consumption is way, way thousands of times lower. So it could not be. So I would be interested in finding out from you who said that and how they calculated it. So that's my immediate reaction, because I showed you the numbers of the physics of riverine transport. So it might be that they're calculating all kinds of, you know, on a container ship, it has goods, thousands of containers in one big thing. And if you calculate the embedded energy in every leather shoe carried there, or every, I don't know, whatever is carried there, maybe you can come to some kind of astronomical figure. But it does not pertain to transport. It pertains to something else, you know. The question, you know, how can, we help? Australia's Murray-Darling Basin, one of the nice things they've done is it's one of the more challenging kind of basin management that they've done. And they're all over there in Nepal, they're in all kinds of places right now trying to help. My argument would be is something that Steve Biggs talks about all the time, which is that these modeling exercises should be really expanded to go beyond hydraulics and hydraulic modeling, to include just the kind of stuff I mentioned, the energy part of it, the all kinds of social and economic aspects also to be brought in as a model, to basically show whether the proposition I have put is right or wrong. It needs to be challenged, it's just putting it. But as good scientists, what we should have is modeling that actually shows, okay, exactly how much economic saving is there in the Ganga basin if riverine transports were developed, and the kind of goods that are transported by trucks and rail are right now shifting to riverine transport. So what is the savings that comes out? And the next question, how will that savings actually be distributed tomorrow, so that those who lost out, whether they are truckers or whatever, can find alternative employments and gainful employment? And if dams have to be built in the Himalaya to provide supplemental water in the dry season, how are those people who are going to be displaced by the dams be better off tomorrow through better compensation? So this is the kind of modeling exercises that I would like to have seen done above and beyond just hydraulic modeling. And Nitish's idea of dismantling Farakka, I hadn't heard that. And if he has said that, I salute him for a very simple reason. Farakka, as I mentioned to you, Jayanta Bandyopadhyay and Vidisha Malik's paper, you should read that. They show that the whole purpose of building the Farakka barrage, if it was not to deny politically the water to East Pakistan, is a separate issue I won't get into. But the stated reason for building Farakka barrage was that water was needed to flush the Calcutta port. What Jayanta and Vidisha Malik have shown is that no amount of flushing of from the along the Hooghly from Farakka will counteract the tidal bore that comes from the other side, which is 700 times more. So the silt just cannot, be flushed out by this method. It has to be flushed out by other methods specifically. But more seriously, and this is something I learned when I was working with a lot of friends of Dinesh Kumar Mishra ji, very few people talk about the damage done upstream of Farakka. Everybody talks about Bangladesh and Farakka only. But upstream of Farakka, what has happened is because the Ganges plain is so flat, as somebody once joked, if you stand on your toes in Patna, you can see Kathmandu. It's very flat. So building a barrage like Farakka there means you've raised the river level by a few meters. That means the silt accumulation, there's a massive accumulation of silt upstream of Farakka called the Bhutini Diara. They call them chores in Bangladesh, I think, but here it's called Diara, I think. No? So there's a Bhutini Diara, it's become so big and is impacting the course of the Ganges. The Ganges has begun to shift now to a point where it is within a few kilometers of a very ancient channel of the Ganges known as Manikchak, I believe. And there's a very good chance in a major flood like we had in 1968, if that recurs, then the Ganges will afflux onto the Manikchak and it will go and join the Mahananda and Tista and bypass the Farakka altogether. So either we systematically and scientifically dismantle the Farakka barrage because it hasn't done what it is supposed to do, or nature will do it for us.
There's one question over here. We'll have to, I think, just take 3 more. In the last round of questions, we are required to wind up early. A microphone here, please.
Dipak ji, I am at a loss to comment anything. Last that I heard about dams was 2 years ago when we were debating large dams, small dams, good dams, bad dams, and now low height dams and high height dams that we are coining the word. Navigation was not on the agenda at all until 2 years ago, as far as I know. And Farakka is the route, of course, I think, if anything doesn't change, it has come to Patna or wherever through Farakka barrage at the moment. Now, starting from the end point that you said, that the Ganga will shift its course and decide future action. There was a meeting in Patna which I was not called to attend, but in that meeting, decommissioning of Farakka and all, probably that was all addressed, and it split the environmentalists, at least in our country, into 2 factions, one supporting the decommissioning of Farakka and the other, they are questioning it. Decommissioning Farakka means, and when more so, when our government says that it's an internal matter to deal with Farakka. Now my question to you will be, if at all, and I don't know if you are competent to answer it because it's bilateral between India and Bangladesh, if it is internal matter, if Farakka is an internal matter to India, why on earth we enter into agreement of water sharing with Bangladesh? That water is ours and the location is ours and we can do whatever we like. In that case...
Can we come to the question of terminate quickly, please?
I don't have statecraft. I told you in the beginning there is no question. I just asked me explanation.
Yeah, okay.
Do we allow the river, now if it comes to question I ask, do we allow the river to change its course, bypass Farakka, and India and Bangladesh fight the disaster jointly? I mean, that may be a collaboration.
Thank you. This question, please keep your intervention as brief as possible because we are under pressure to, right at the back over there, gentlemen. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that interesting discussion and presentation. My question is very simply, is there what is the political economy of not having inland waterways? I remember Sir Arthur Cotton in the 1850s wrote in his paper he said that it was a London lobby of steel who wanted to invest mostly in railways, which is why the Britishers gave much more investment to railways than to canal irrigation. Are there similar factors that explain the lack of inland waterways in India? Thanks.
There was a hand over here, yeah. And there,
So thank you for the presentation. Well, I'd like to draw your attention to the paleo channels. There has been paleo channels. There has been a lot of debate that Saraswati has got some water reservoirs coming in through paleo channels, and we can use those. And probably that's the answer to the water scarcity that every country is going through, and paleo channels can be an answer. So I'm really curious as an hydrologist that if we really try to explore, wouldn't we like again one more attempt to use the reservoir of water rather than trying to reharvest or reuse? That's one part. As policymakers, how we can go about it. And the second part is, if at all we have got links, then how can these links be harnessed in a way to secure our future rather than discounting the future?
Thank you. There are two hands over here. Just the last one behind, just behind Jeff. Yep. यहाँ लिएगा टोपी यहाँ gentleman यहाँ पे है ना? Sorry. I have to identify this. Yeah, just last two questions for now.
Thank you very much. Very good as always, Dipak. And I just wonder, like we were briefly discussing yesterday, if somehow the large couldn't learn from the small. And as I said, starting work in Bangladesh before I started coming here, I was just always shocked when I visit like the Ganga or whatnot in Dhaka, and the amazing amount of traffic that was going on with small and large there. And then when I came and I crossed the Ganges here at Patna the first time, I was all excited to see something similar, and I see very little, as we discussed, and how we could maybe the small, like these battery-powered three-wheelers that work their way onto the road despite municipal laws against them everywhere in South Asia. If we might not start with smaller boats at first, and then work our way up as the larger infrastructure gets there. Bye.
Jeff.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't going to talk, but I think I need to, because I'm rather shocked at P.K. Mishra's comment about the Faraka. My understanding of the international law on riparian rights is that downstream has rights as well as upstream. And remember that to play at that game, if Nepal and Bangladesh decide to get together. So I'm really shocked at that remark about Faraka being seen as simply an internal decision and issue for India. Very shocked. The other thing I want to say is that my understanding is that the water tables, groundwater tables in North Bihar, as indeed they are in Bangladesh, are deepening, are receding in that sense. And that there is a return now to surface water irrigation in North Bihar, and also, as it happens, in Bangladesh as well. And I think that will have implications for your argument.
Okay, large dams. I know when we talk of navigation, a lot of my environmentalist friends, say what? But my contention here is that we really need in South Asia to really work out a new environmental paradigm. The environmentalists who've been, let's say, just protesting dams, I've been one of them, what happens is, we have to present alternatives. We don't like something bad, but we know we are against something, but we also should be very clear in stating what we are for, even to start a discourse. So it's the problem with this kind of a very securitized discourse on rivers, like with, on the Faraka. You go to Bangladesh and every problem is Faraka. You see, there's a little bit dust here and say, Faraka. That's what happens in Bangladesh. It's amazing. Okay. It's not true. So the point here is that rivers are never an internal matter, much as anybody might try to make it. They cross boundaries. They don't respect boundaries at all, and you have to address them in a more holistic manner. That's my response. On the political economy of transport, every one of them has a political economy behind it, and I would really strongly advise you to read Wolfgang Sachs' book, the late Wolfgang Sachs, a good friend. He's written this book called For the Love of the Automobile, and has really put a very good account of how the lobby for motor cars managed to completely sideline the railways. It's an amazing story of how that happened, So there is always that. In Nepal, it's the trucking interests that have destroyed the ropeways, which is a much more mountain-friendly technology and climate-friendly technology for the mountains, but it's been destroyed by the trucking and gas pump lobby. On this, I wasn't quite sure about this thing about the Saraswati and all that. I mean, I hear all this. My view is that, Saraswati is nothing but a mythical name for the underground flow of water. There is always underground backflow into every river. And when you have a conjunction of two surface rivers, there is a huge amount of backflow that comes from in the non-monsoon months. So the idea is that ultimately our water comes from rain and rainfall. And we have to be able to do our modeling, as we talked about again, with a much better integration of rainfall and uncertainty modeling, and not just the river hydraulic modeling. So that's where I would see the kind of solution. On the small transport, yes, if we really push for navigation as a solution, the room must be opened up to the smaller traffic right away. Promotion of small riverine traffic. Bangladesh has done a great job reviving old traditional crafts, modernizing them with small engines and all. And in the process, there is something in technology studies called technological depth. You cannot tomorrow, India cannot hope to start this Ganges waterway and immediately hope that big container ships and all will come. Where is the expertise? Where is that understanding? Where are the rules? Where are the laws? These all come about, like in Nepal with the micro hydro, where we have developed all our capacity to survey, to put up lines, to manufacture even parts and all that. That depth of technology has to come about, and that can only start with reviving the old crafts that used to run all along the Ganges, help those people to do it. And these are, by the way, the most marginal communities that lost everything. These are the Maji community, we call them in Nepal, and they're the most marginal. So it would be a social justice also. And finally, on this downstream rights, Bangladesh, yes, water tables are going down everywhere, but much less in the lower Ganges plains. It's going down because of certain pockets have huge amount of excessive pumping of groundwater going on. But the lower Ganges plains is so full of groundwater that it's difficult to imagine that it will be like Mehsana in Gujarat, which is a dry hard rock area. So in Bangladesh, the building of this, the Faraka Treaty was actually pushed and saluted by a section, again the political economy, of Bangladeshi hydrocrats who essentially wanted to build the Ganga barrage there, just a few kilometers downstream on the Bangladesh side of the Ganga barrage. Okay. Now my argument is Faraka Treaty is a bad treaty precisely on that count. If it was a good treaty, one barrage, for heaven's sake, one Tista barrage, or one Faraka barrage is enough to divert water to wherever you want, miles and miles away. You don't need to build another barrage, one in Bangladesh, one in, Bengal in Tista, another one here in a few kilometers. It's just a dream of civil engineers to do more civil engineering. It has nothing to do with water management.
I think we'll have to conclude, really. Thank you. I just conclude with one brief observation. This is a very vast topic, and I'm sure all of you would have views on this, that the issue of water cooperation between India and Nepal has been in the doldrums as far as I can recall my entire career. And if navigation gives an opening, even if it's a small opening, it should not be ignored or brushed aside. We should definitely look at it. And thank you, Mr. Dipak Gyawali, for this extremely thought-provoking lecture.